I'm Jeff Stock with the Hamilton Conservation Authority's Watershed Stewardship Program. I'm happy to chat with you about getting your Ecosize, the benefits to managing invasive plants at home and your community. So first things first, what exactly is an invasive species, you might be asking? Well, according to the Government of Canada, invasive species are plants, animals, and microorganisms introduced by human activity outside their natural past, present, or current distribution, whose introduction or spread threatens the environment, the economy, society, and that includes human health. So starting with the word invasive, well, you have trouble. The root of invasive comes from the word invade, and that's exactly what they do. Invasive species, introduced or alien species, as they're often called, are non-native species that invade and disrupt ecosystems that they colonize. So they pose a threat to biodiversity by outpacing native species, either by growing and spreading at what can be alarming rates, or by outcompeting habitats and food sources. So according to the World Conservation Union, invasive alien species are the second most significant threat to biodiversity after habitat loss. In their new ecosystems, invasive alien species become predators, competitors, parasites, hybridizers, and even diseases of our native domesticated plants and animals. It can take the right conditions for an alien species to become established and grow, though. In fact, most alien introduced species don't actually become permanently established in their newly found environment. They either find the wrong type of conditions for survival, or they're unable to produce enough offspring to maintain a viable population. And for those species that are able to reproduce and survive, most never actually cause any significant problems. Some introduced species, however, are able to thrive and even flourish at their new location. So in addition, they're usually able to reproduce and spread very quickly, often outcompeting native plant and animal species for water, food, and space. Invasive alien species generally share common characteristics which can make them difficult to control and maintain. And that can include higher rates of reproduction, fewer natural predators, and the ability to thrive in different types of environments. So the impact of invasive species on native ecosystems, habitats, and species is pretty severe and can be difficult to reverse, oftentimes. Costing a fair bit of money over the years. And so how do they get around exactly? Well, people are the primary spreaders. They're primarily spread by human activities. So in the goods that we use, traveling around the world very quickly, sometimes we're unknowingly carrying species as we go. For the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to be focusing specifically on invasive plant species. So further to the question of invasive species, what is Ecosize, and what does that have to do with invasive species? So Ecosize was an initiative that was developed as a way to engage the public in a meaningful way in the field of stewardship at Hamilton Conservation Authority. I'm always looking for ways to engage and mobilize the public to do their part to mitigate the effects of invasive species in natural areas. Pulling, digging, lopping, uprooting, those types of things. Tree plantings and garbage pickups can often be easier sells, because on the surface it's kind of cut and dry, whereas the removal of invasive species isn't always so easy. So years ago, when we started hosting a few invasive species polls, people would remark how great it made them feel afterwards, something to the effect of getting a good workout. I guess it could be somewhat akin, depending on what species you're removing, to kind of like high intensity gardening. And a light bulb went off in my head. I thought, you know, maybe this is an opportunity to pitch invasive species removal as a way to get exercise, and hence Ecosize was born. So we launched the initiative back in 2019. As you can see in these images here, the woman on the left has a pretty substantial amount of invasive species in her backyard, on her literal doorstep. On the flip side, you have an individual who's working towards having pulled out some invasive plants in this natural area here. So the idea was that getting people engaged, getting people involved, and you know, getting involved in nature in a meaningful way. So what does Ecosize exactly get you? Wow. A more resilient landscape and a more active and resilient you. So we've hosted a number of successful events to remove invasive species on both private lands and on a Hamilton Conservation Authority owned conservation areas in the Watershed. We received some funding actually in 2020 thanks to a Hamilton Conservation Foundation grant, and we've been expanding those events over time. So some of the species we've targeted, Japanese knotweed, multifloor rose, honeysuckle, English ivy, privet, buckthorn, Japanese barberry, English ivy, privet, the list goes on. So the motto that we have for Ecosize is get active out in nature, do some good for the environment while you're at it. I think that's a pretty good summation of what we're trying to do. You know, building something meaningful in the endeavor of invasive species removal, and something I hope you can relate to and gravitate towards doing, maybe, whether it's on your property, maybe on an apartment complex, or in your shared space. So invasive species do have a variety of environments in which they thrive, and you're likely to find one right on your doorstep. You'll find them everywhere from, you know, popping up in some of the most pristine places that you never expect, all the way to cracking through the concrete, maybe in your backyard unexpectedly. So in the effort to get Ecosize, there are quite a few benefits that you can appreciate while you're pulling invasive plants from time to time. So I generated a list here. First one, exercise, obviously. Getting outside usually involves some level of exercise, even if it's just taking a walk in your neighborhood, getting an idea of the makeup of the plants in your immediate neighborhood area. So even like 15 to 30 minutes of exercise each day can have some pretty long-term benefits to your mind and body, and decreases your risk of diseases like diabetes, heart disease, arthritis. And working on an invasive species pull is usually having us working at a dedicated site for around 2 hours, or whatever pace that works for the individual. So again, like I said, real high intensity gardening. Stress relief. Studies show that being in nature reduces tension and depression. A study done in South Korea showed that looking at pictures of natural settings can even increase a person's general mood and positivity and emotional stability, which is fantastic. So you can imagine working in an environment where you're immersed in greenery is going to have a pretty measurable effect on your mood. Vitamin D. So vitamin D has a wide range of health benefits. It can boost our immune systems. 10 to 15 minutes of sunlight a day for our bodies can help produce the proper levels of vitamin D. So getting outside and treating yourself to some vitamin D is really critical. You can imagine 2 hours of pulling invasive plants is going to have a pretty dramatic effect on your vitamin D levels. Sleep. Oops. So working out in nature can really increase your sleep quality. So this is partly due to stress reduction and also because exposure to sunlight during the day can increase your melatonin production at night. And melatonin is needed to regulate your sleep cycle. So you're better off to sleep knowing you've done a job well done after a good day of Ecosize on a cool, crisp fall day. And eyesight. So much time behind a screen, too much time can really take a toll on one's eyesight. Spending some time outdoors gives your eyes an opportunity to focus on objects far away, near and far, and can help reduce eye strain. So working in a variable environment is really going to go a long way to help keeping your eyesight healthy. Researchers in the United States and Germany actually found that that being in nature actually helps improve creativity. So the study showed that even looking at the color green for a few seconds triggered greater creativity than others. And maybe if you develop some new and innovative ways of removing invasive species while being out in nature, please let me know. We're always looking for new and innovative ways to tackle the myriad of invasive plants we're managing. And finally, relationships. So we do spend a lot of time in front of screens. So getting out in nature, really a great way to reconnect with people, meeting some new faces, getting involved in Ecosize events. You're likely to meet some like-minded individuals who are interested in local ecology, environmental health, sustainability, and you might even make some new connections or even some friendships. So I've hopefully sold you on the idea of getting on board for your Ecosize and decided to tackle invasive species on your property. So where to start? Start small. Develop a plan for your property that you're working on the landscape in question. This could involve drawing a map of the space you have or building a list of invasive species on the property that are present. And once you've done that work, you can start building a master plan for your course of action. Are you going to focus on one species at a time? Are you going to work your way from the eastern edge of the property to the western edge of the property? Or are you going to go full tilt, get a couple dozen of your friends and just have a major invasive species blitz? Whatever works for you, that's what's most important. So just remember to keep it manageable, start small, and be realistic so you don't overwhelm yourself and you can grow from there. So I'd also add that it's important to keep in mind that you target the root causes of invasive species and not just the symptoms. So if you find yourself pulling dozens and dozens of little saplings year after year, and they keep popping back to no avail, maybe you might want to take a step back and find out where those saplings are coming from. There may be a parent tree that will save a lot of your future self from some extra hard work. And as the old saying goes, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, which I think catches it. And don't forget to stretch. So whatever you end up doing, make sure you've given yourself a little bit of time to get ready for whatever invasive species you're dealing with. So it might require a fair bit of repetitive action, and a little bit of stretching beforehand could save you a lot of aches and pains after the fact if you prepared yourself for an afternoon's field work. So I pulled together just a very small handful of some of the common invasive species that you might run into. So common buckthorn, also known as Rhamnus cathartica. So this is a pretty common invasive shrub found in our watersheds. It's a pretty hardy tree, shade, drought tolerant, comes in a wide range of habitats. One of the big issues is that the berries that they produce it's a prolifically producing fruit tree, and unfortunately acts as a diuretic for birds that eat it. So it gets spread pretty quickly, and unfortunately it doesn't have any natural predators to maintain it, so it can take over an environment pretty quickly. Excuse me. Another pretty prolific species, Multifloor Rose. So it's a multi-stemmed woody perennial shrub. You'll find it kind of in sunny outcroppings where roadsides, opportunities for it to flourish. Again, there are no natural predators to keep it in check. So it will flourish in the understory and really outcompete pretty effectively many of our native species. I don't know if you can see my arms here. No, not really, but it's pretty nasty too. We were working in a big field of it this afternoon, and boy, does it smart. And finally, Japanese knotweed. So this is one of our worst offenders in the invasive species field that we're trying to combat. So semi-woody stemmed perennial, not too dissimilar looking to bamboo actually. It was originally planted for erosion control and has unfortunately escaped. Oftentimes you'll find it getting transported in fill projects. So be wary if you're planning to have a portion of your property regraded. Make sure that it's certified clean fill. A lot of this stuff gets spread in contaminated fill, and nothing short of excavation or short of that, really, you're going to be spending 10 years of digging, herbicides. It's a nasty one. So on that note, it's really important to know what tools, the effective tools that you're going to want to be using for the invasive species that you're working on, and knowing how to use them effectively. So there's a variety of helpful tools when it comes to mechanical control. When you're being active, everything from pruners, loppers, shovels, trowels, even the orange tools you can see in the image here are called extractigators, which are a very handy tool for pulling up the roots of invasive, moderately sized shrubs, kind of like the buckthorn that you saw earlier. Very effective tool. And something you'll likely see if you ever end up coming to one of our Ecosize events. So, sometimes it's hard to admit we cannot take every magnitude of invasive species on alone. And I think it's important to know when to rely on other individuals, organizations that might be able to help you and assist you in the task. So here's a few items in when to take a second look and decide whether maybe you might need to step back. So species type and invasiveness. So there are some species that just won't quit, like the Japanese knotweed you saw earlier. And it's important to know that you may need to put in a significant amount of time and effort to really successfully eradicate an invasive species from an effort. Sometimes this is going to take 5 to 7 years, depending on the species, to really wear it out from the seed bank, perhaps. Perhaps it's the timing of when you're removing the species, which can be really time and labor consuming, and really knowing to which helpful resources there are available. Certainly relying upon your trusty neighborhood stewardship technician with a conservation authority can help. The magnitude of invasion. So for those who have large swaths of land in which they own and tend to, you may find that there may be a period of time where, an invasion is spread so wide that, you're just not going to be able to handle it alone, that you just can't keep up with its spread. And finally, just some manual techniques. Unfortunately, the invasive species won't take to these conventional methods of removal, like digging, like using some of the tools shown earlier. They could be too deep in the soil, spread too far afield, or any small fragment left in the soil isn't going to allow it to regenerate, and it can be quite frustrating sometimes. So that takes me to the next slide. additional options. So if you've done enough research on the invasive species that are inhabiting your property, you may find that there are some notoriously aggressive species that you're just going to find it possible to eradicate on your own by traditional methods. So this is a good time to identify when taking it on alone may be too much and when to call for help. So your respective representative conservation authority is going to be able to help you not only on large scale invasions. We can also help you find the right contractor if it's going to require possibly a herbicide treatment. And our conservation authorities also offer a grant program for tackling some of the more aggressive and difficult to defeat invasive species in the watersheds. And of course, we're here to help you with developing a management plan and hopefully an eradication plan that suits the needs of your property. So bridging other gaps that maybe there just may be need to build capacity in your own community. Building capacity between neighbors is a great way to get ahead of the game. So maybe there's a local environmental group that's operating in your neighborhood that could be helpful. Social media can play a huge part in bringing people together for common causes, whether it's identifying, particular invasive species locally or throughout Ontario. There's also great master gardening groups out there that can be an invaluable resource. So you may find yourself taking the lead on something. Maybe you need to be the one that takes charge and starts knocking on doors of neighbors. Unfortunately, invasive species don't always respect borders. Often they don't. An invasive species on a neighbor's property is likely going to become an invasive species issue on your property. It's important to get in touch with your neighbors and get that conversation going. So here's an example I wanted to share where a landowner was able to build their capacity and make some headway beyond their property alone. So the landowner in the image here, number one, got in touch with conservation stewardship staff and enlisted an Ecosize volunteer event to remove some of the invasive species on their property. They've been working hard to manage invasive species on their property, but just didn't have the people power to do so. So we ended up having a phenomenal invasive species removal that day. And what happened was connections were made with neighbors, word spread between number 2 and 3, that there were opportunities to work with the Conservation Authority to help them with their own particular invasive species issues, similar to what number 1 was sharing. And we built onto that with number 4, which is actually Hamilton Conservation Authority lands. So building upon what the landowners had been doing and really growing that area where we're really trying to get invasive species under control in quite a wide area, and keeps growing. And coincidentally enough, number 5 is actually a staff member with the Conservation Authority. So that is another connection that we're going to be making soon, and further spreading that knockdown of invasive species in the area and restoring biodiversity. So just a few more resources that are available to you that you can find online. So there's the Ontario Invading Species Program. They have a program that delivers a number of initiatives that promote public engagement about invasive species awareness and prevention across the province. There's the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. They're a not-for-profit organization that provides leadership, expertise, and forums to engage and empower Ontarians to take action on their invasive species issues. And I would highly recommend you go check out their page. They have phenomenal resources available to help not only identify, but manage and eradicate a great deal of the invasive species that we're managing or dealing with in our respective watersheds. Further to that, iNaturalist, which is an app that you can use. It's a crowdsourced species identification system. You can either use it on your computer or, better yet, on your smartphone. It helps you identify species that you may encounter on your property. And better yet, the information used is shared between organizations that track invasive species spread, not only across locally, across Ontario, and even North America, which is fantastic. And finally, the Hamilton Conservation Authority has a list of videos. We were lucky enough to hire on a couple of phenomenal invasive species technicians earlier this year, and they've taken it upon themselves to create some videos, how-to videos. As you can see in the image here, how to smother invasive ground cover. They've got several more, and there are more to come. So I highly recommend you check out the Hamilton Conservation webpage for that. So if you're interested, maybe you want to get your, before taking on a major task yourself, maybe you want to get involved in a volunteer Ecosize event that we're going to be hosting this fall. You can go to our webpage here and register as a volunteer, conservationhamilton.ca/volunteer opportunity. So we do have a handful of volunteer Ecosize events coming up. You can meet our volunteer stewardship and invasive species techs. And you can learn a heck of a lot about invasive species that we're managing, and you might be able to put two and two together with maybe some species you're dealing with yourself. And finally, here's my contact information. So if you have any questions, or if you're in the Hamilton Conservation Watershed and want to get in touch, by all means, send me an email, or you can give me a call. And that's everything for me. So thank you very much.